The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Stockton, California, as Willow Lane stood frozen on her porch, clutching the telegram that had just shattered her world. "Regret to inform you. Mining accident. Husband deceased." The words blurred before her eyes as she struggled to breathe, one hand instinctively moving to her swollen belly where her fourth child grew, the other gripping the doorframe to keep from collapsing. It was September 1873, and at 26 years old, Willow was about to become a widow with 4 children in a town that had already begun whispering about how a woman alone couldn't possibly manage. Inside the small wooden house, her 3 young children played, blissfully unaware that their father, Thomas Lane, would never return from the silver mines of Nevada where he'd gone seeking fortune 6 months ago. 6-year-old Emma with her father's bright blue eyes, 4-year-old James with his mischievous smile, and little Sarah, barely 2 years old and still toddling uncertainly around the furniture. And soon, there would be another mouth to feed, another heart to break with the news that they would never know their father. Willow took a shuddering breath and pressed the telegram to her chest. There would be time for tears later. Now, she needed to be strong. She pushed open the door and stepped into the warmth of her home, forcing a smile for her children even as her world crumbled around her. "Mama, look what I made." Emma held up a crude drawing of their family, all 5 of them, including the baby yet to come. Thomas stood tall in the picture, his stick-figure arms stretched wide as if to embrace them all. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Willow whispered, her voice breaking as she took the drawing with trembling fingers. "Why don't you help James and Sarah wash up for supper?" As the children scampered off, Willow sank into a chair at the kitchen table, her hands cradling her 7-month pregnant belly. How would she feed them all? The small sum Thomas had sent home barely covered their needs, and the little vegetable garden behind the house wouldn't sustain them through the winter. The thought of losing their home, of having to beg for charity or send her children to work, was too much to bear. The next weeks passed in a blur of grief and anxiety. Willow sold what few valuables she possessed: her mother's silver hairbrush, Thomas's pocket watch, even her wedding ring to pay the mounting bills. The baby within her grew heavier, and with each passing day, the fear of what would happen after the birth grew alongside it. On a bitter cold November morning, Willow's water broke. Mrs. Jenkins from next door came running at Emma's frightened call, bringing clean linens and sending for the midwife. "You'll be all right, dear," the older woman assured her, though her eyes betrayed her concern as she took in Willow's pale face and the sparseness of the house, where the fire had dwindled to embers for lack of wood. The labor was long and hard, the pain intensified by grief and worry. As dawn broke on the following day, Willow gave birth to a healthy baby boy whom she named Thomas after his father. The joy of his arrival was tempered by the crushing reality that faced them. "He's beautiful, Mrs. Lane," the midwife said softly, placing the swaddled infant in Willow's arms. "A strong boy," Willow nodded, tears streaming down her face as she gazed at her newborn son. "He looks like his father." "I've made some broth," Mrs. Jenkins said, bustling around the kitchen. "You need to keep up your strength, for all of them." The older woman's kindness was a balm to Willow's wounded soul, but it couldn't change the harsh truth. Winter was coming, and she had 4 children to feed and no means to do so. The small amount of money she'd saved from selling their possessions wouldn't last more than a few weeks. Word of Willow's plight spread through Stockton. Some neighbors brought food or firewood, but charity could only stretch so far in a town where many were struggling. The bank manager had already visited, his sympathy paper thin as he explained that without payment, They would have to vacate the house by the end of December. 3 weeks after little Thomas's birth, a fierce storm descended upon Stockton. Wind howled around the eaves of the house, finding every crack and crevice to send icy drafts inside. Willow had gathered all 4 children in the main room, building up the fire with the last of their wood and wrapping them in every blanket she could find. "Tell us a story, Mama," Emma pleaded, her teeth chattering despite the blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "Once upon a time," Willow began, her voice soft and steady despite the fear that clutched at her heart, "there was a brave knight who protected his family from dragons and storms." As she spoke, spinning tales of adventure and courage that reminded her children of their father, baby Thomas began to wail. Hunger, Willow knew. Her own milk was growing thin from lack of proper food. "Is Tommy going to be all right, Mama?" James asked, his small face solemn in the firelight. "Of course he is," Willow assured him, though she wasn't certain herself. "We all are." The storm raged through the night, bringing with it a bitter cold that seeped into their bones. By morning, the fire had died completely, and Willow found herself shivering violently as she tried to feed baby Thomas. The older children huddled together for warmth, their faces pale and pinched. "We need wood," Willow murmured to herself, looking around desperately. There was nothing left to burn except the furniture, and that would only last so long. She had to get help. Wrapping baby Thomas securely against her chest, Willow buttoned her threadbare coat around them both. "Emma, you're in charge while I'm gone. Keep everyone together and under the blankets." "Where are you going, Mama?" Emma's eyes were wide with fear. "To find help. I won't be long." Willow pressed a kiss to each child's forehead before stepping out into the snow-covered world. The wind cut through her like a knife as she made her way toward the center of town. Snow had drifted against buildings and across the road, making each step a struggle. Few people were out in such weather, and those who were hurried past with heads down, intent on their own survival. By the time Willow reached the general store, her fingers and toes were numb with cold, and baby Thomas had grown eerily quiet against her chest. The bell above the door jangled as she pushed it open, stumbling slightly as warmth enveloped her. "Mrs. Lane." "Mr. Peterson," the store owner exclaimed in surprise. "You shouldn't be out in this weather, especially with the baby." "I need help," Willow said, her voice cracking. "We have no wood, no food, the children." A man standing by the counter turned at her words. Tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered by sun and wind, he regarded her with intense green eyes from beneath the brim of his hat. Willow recognized him vaguely, a cattle driver who occasionally passed through town with herds bound for the railhead. "How many children?" he asked, his deep voice startling in the quiet store. "4," Willow replied, gently pulling back the edge of her coat to reveal Thomas's tiny face. "This one's just 3 weeks old." The stranger's eyes softened slightly as they rested on the infant. Without another word, he shrugged off his heavy sheepskin coat and stepped toward her. "Take this," he said, draping it around her shoulders. "It'll keep you both warmer than that thin thing you're wearing." The coat was still warm from his body, enveloping Willow in unexpected comfort. "I can't, you can," he cut her off firmly. Turning to Mr. Peterson, he said, "Load up a wagon with firewood, flour, coffee, beans, and whatever else a family needs to get through this storm. Put it on my account." The store owner hesitated. "That's mighty generous, Mr. Irons, but do it now," the man Mr. Irons said, his tone brooking no argument. "And add warm blankets and milk if you have it." Willow stared at him in disbelief. "Sir, I cannot accept such charity. I have no way to repay you." He turned those intense eyes back to her. "It's not charity, madam, it's common decency." He touched the brim of his hat. Remington Irons. Most folks call me Rem. Willow Lane, she replied automatically, still stunned by his intervention. Why would you help a stranger this way? Something passed across his face, a shadow of old pain, quickly masked. No one should face a winter storm alone with 4 little ones. He glanced down at baby Thomas, who had begun to stir against her chest. Especially not one so new to the world. Within the hour, Remington had personally driven a wagon loaded with supplies to Willow's small house. The children watched wide-eyed as this tall stranger carried an armload after armload of firewood, stacking it neatly by the hearth, before building up a roaring fire that soon filled the room with blessed heat. Emma, always the boldest, finally approached him as he crouched by the fireplace. "Are you an angel, mister? Mama said angels help people in need." A rare smile crossed Remington's face, softening his hard features. "No, little lady, just a man who's seen enough cold winters to know you don't let folks face them without help." Willow, feeding baby Thomas by the growing warmth of the fire, watched as this mysterious cowboy then proceeded to unpack food supplies onto her barren kitchen shelves, sacks of flour and sugar, jars of preserved fruits, salted meat, coffee, and even a precious bottle of milk for the children. "Mr. Irons," she began, her voice thick with emotion, "I don't know how to thank you." He glanced over at her, then back to his task. "No need for thanks, and it's Rem, like I said." As he worked, Willow noticed that despite his gruff manner, there was a gentleness to him when he interacted with her children. When little Sarah toddled over and wrapped her arms around his leg, he froze for a moment before awkwardly patting her head. "Pretty," Sarah declared, pointing to the silver conchos on his leather vest. "Thank you, miss," he replied with formal gravity that made the 2-year-old giggle. Once the supplies were unloaded and the house was warm, Remington stood by the door, clearly preparing to leave. Outside, the storm continued unabated, snow swirling in the growing darkness. "You can't go back out in that," Willow said, surprising herself with her boldness. "It's getting worse." He hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "I don't want to impose." "You saved us today," she said simply. "At least stay until the storm passes." That night, Remington slept on the floor near the fire, having refused Willow's offer of Thomas's old bed. The children, warm and fed for the first time in weeks, slept soundly in their shared room, while Willow dozed in the rocking chair with baby Thomas cradled against her chest. In the quiet hours before dawn, she awoke to find Remington watching her, his face unreadable in the flickering firelight. "You should get some proper rest," he said softly. "I can hold the little one." Willow hesitated, her protective instincts warring with her exhaustion. Something in the man's steady gaze reassured her. Carefully, she transferred the sleeping infant into his large, calloused hands. Remington held the baby with surprising confidence, cradling him securely against his chest as he settled back down by the fire. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Lane. Dawn's still a ways off." Too tired to argue, Willow curled up in the chair and closed her eyes, lulled by the sound of Remington's deep voice as he murmured quietly to her son. When she woke again, sunlight was streaming through the windows. The storm had passed during the night, leaving a pristine white landscape in its wake. Inside, the house was warm, and the smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the air. Willow sat up with a start, momentarily disoriented. Baby Thomas was no longer in her arms, and the rocking chair had been draped with a blanket she didn't recognize. "Morning, Mama," Emma called cheerfully from the kitchen table, where she sat with James and Sarah, all of them eating plates of food. "Mr. Rem made breakfast." Sure enough, Remington stood at her stove, looking oddly domestic as he flipped bacon in her cast-iron skillet. Baby Thomas was securely cradled in one arm against his broad chest, apparently content in the stranger's hold. "He was fussing," Remington explained when he caught her staring. "Didn't want to wake you." "You didn't have to cook," Willow said, flustered as she rose and straightened her rumpled dress. "Needed to eat anyway," he replied with a shrug, transferring the bacon to a plate. "Coffee's hot." Over breakfast, Willow learned that Remington had been on his way back to his small ranch north of Stockton when the storm hit. He'd been in town to sell some horses and had planned to leave the previous morning before the weather turned. "My foreman can manage things for another day or two," he said when Willow expressed concern about delaying his return. "Still, you've done more than enough," she insisted. "We'll be fine now." Remington studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "Will you?" 4 little ones, winter just starting, and from the looks of things not much money coming in. Willow flushed, embarrassed by the blunt assessment of her situation. "My husband. There was a mining accident. I'm still figuring out what comes next." "I'm sorry for your loss," he said quietly. "When did it happen?" 3 months ago. Just before Thomas was born. Remington's eyes moved to the baby in his arms, then to the 3 older children, now playing quietly by the fire. 4 babies, he murmured, almost to himself. Then, with sudden decision, he looked back at Willow. "I need help at my ranch, housekeeper, cook. The cabin's not much, but it's solid, room for all of you." Willow stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You're offering me a job?" "Yes." His voice was firm. "And a place to stay for all of you, but why, you don't even know me." Remington's gaze dropped to baby Thomas, his rough fingers gently touching the infant's cheek. "My sister had 4 little ones when her husband was killed. Nobody helped her." His voice had roughened. By winter's end, she'd lost 2 of them to sickness. The others were taken by the state and separated, never saw each other again. Understanding dawned on Willow. "I'm sorry that happened to your family." "It was a long time ago," he said, though his eyes told a different story. "Point is, I've got the means to help now. And a ranch house that's too empty." The offer was unexpected, almost unbelievable. Yet as Willow looked around at her children, fed and warm for the moment, but with an uncertain future, she felt a flicker of hope. "What about the people who work for you? What would they think of a widow and 4 children suddenly appearing?" "It's my ranch," Remington said simply. "And I don't employ any man who'd question my decisions." He hesitated, then added more gently, "Think on it. No need to decide today." But by the end of that day, as Willow watched Remington chop more wood for her dwindling pile and fix a broken shutter that had been letting in cold air for weeks, her decision was already forming. When the bank manager appeared at her door with eviction papers, giving her until the end of the week to vacate, it solidified completely. "If your offer still stands," she said to Remington that evening after the children were asleep, "we'll accept." He nodded once, his expression giving nothing away. "We can leave the day after tomorrow. I'll make arrangements." 2 days later, Willow Lane and her 4 children left the only home they'd known, boarding a wagon loaded with their few belongings. Emma and James bounced with excitement at the adventure, while Sarah clung to her mother's skirts, uncertain of this big change. Baby Thomas, wrapped snugly against the winter air, slept peacefully in Willow's arms. As the wagon pulled away from Stockton, Willow felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. Behind them lay grief and uncertainty. Ahead lay the unknown. But the steady presence of Remington Irons beside her on the wagon seat offered something she hadn't felt in months: safety. The journey to Remington's ranch took most of the day, winding through rolling hills that gradually gave way to pine forests. By late afternoon, they crested a rise, and the ranch spread out before them, a sprawling valley with a creek running through it, pastures dotted with cattle. and in the distance, a substantial log house with smoke curling from its chimney. "Welcome to the Iron R," Remington said, a hint of pride in his voice as he slowed the horses. "It's beautiful," Willow breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. "I didn't realize it would be so large." "Started with 50 acres and a run-down cabin," he explained. "Built it up over 12 years. Now it's almost 1,000 acres. Emma leaned forward from the back of the wagon. "Are there horses, Mr. Rem? Papa promised to teach me to ride someday." A shadow crossed Remington's face at the mention of her father, but he nodded. "Got about 30 horses. Some are working stock, but there's a few gentle ones suitable for learning." As they approached the main house, two men emerged onto the porch, one older with a gray beard, the other younger with a friendly, open face. "That's Hank, my foreman," Remington explained, gesturing to the older man. "And Caleb, one of my hands. Good men, both of them." The wagon came to a stop in front of the house, and Remington jumped down before coming around to help Willow and the children. Hank approached, his weathered face curious but kind as he took in the woman and children. "Welcome to Iron R, madam," he said, touching his hat respectfully. "Boss told us you'd be joining us." "Thank you," Willow replied, suddenly nervous under the scrutiny. "I'm Willow Lane. These are my children Emma, James, Sarah, and baby Thomas." "Madam," Hank acknowledged with a nod to each child. "We got everything ready inside like Rem asked. Caleb here brought in fresh milk from town this morning." The inside of the ranch house surprised Willow. While undeniably masculine in its furnishings, all dark wood and leather, it was spacious and well built, with a massive stone fireplace dominating the main room. A staircase led to a second floor, and several doors indicated additional rooms on the ground level. "Your rooms are upstairs," Remington said, carrying their trunks inside. "Got the largest one ready for you and the baby. The other children can share the room next to it, unless you'd rather keep them all together." "You've thought of everything," Willow said, touched by his consideration. "Hank's wife helped," he admitted. "She lives in town now, but she came out yesterday to make sure things would be suitable for a family." That first evening at the Iron R established a pattern that would carry them through the winter months. Willow cooked dinner for Remington and whatever hands were staying in the bunkhouse, finding comfort in the familiar routine of preparing meals. The kitchen was better equipped than any she'd worked in before, with a large cast iron stove and ample storage. Remington, for his part, proved to be a quiet but attentive host. He answered the older children's endless questions with patience and showed them around the parts of the ranch close to the house. With baby Thomas, he maintained a respectful distance, though Willow often caught him watching the infant with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. As December turned to January, and January to February, life at the Iron R fell into a comfortable rhythm. Willow kept the house, cooked the meals, and cared for her children. In return, they had shelter, food, and safety more than she could have hoped for just months ago. Yet as her grief for Thomas began to soften around the edges, Willow found herself increasingly aware of Remington Irons as a man rather than simply her benefactor. She noticed the way the corner of his mouth quirked up when Emma said something precocious, or how his hands, rough from years of ranch work, could be incredibly gentle when helping little Sarah onto the pony he'd designated as hers. Most of all, she noticed how he watched her, when he thought she wasn't looking, with a longing that mirrored what she was beginning to feel herself. One evening in late February, after the children were asleep, Willow found Remington sitting on the porch despite the cold, staring out at the star-filled sky. "You'll catch your death," she chided gently, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stepped outside. He glanced up, surprise and pleasure briefly crossing his face before his usual reserve returned. "Just thinking." "Penny for your thoughts?" Willow asked, settling onto the bench beside him. Remington was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "Been wondering if you and the children are happy here." The question took her aback. "Of course we are. You've given us everything we need." "That's not the same as happy," he pointed out quietly. Willow considered his words. "The children are thriving. Emma talks about nothing but horses now. James follows Hank around like a shadow. Even Sarah has stopped asking when we're going home." She paused, then added softly, "And I feel safe here. After months of fear, that's no small thing." Remington nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And when spring comes, will you want to go back to town, find work there maybe? Stockton's growing fast." "Are you asking me to leave?" Willow felt a sudden tightness in her chest at the thought. "No," he said quickly, turning to face her. "Not at all, I don't want you to feel trapped here out of gratitude." Understanding dawned on Willow. "Is that what you think? That I stay because I owe you?" He looked away, his profile sharp against the night sky. "You don't owe me anything, Willow. Never did." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it sent an unexpected warmth through her despite the cold night air. "Remington," she said deliberately, causing him to look back at her. "I stay because this has become home, not just for my children, but for me too." Something flickered in his eyes, hope, perhaps, or relief. But before he could respond, a cry came from inside the house, baby Thomas awakening for his nighttime feeding. "I should go to him," Willow said, rising reluctantly. Remington nodded. "Good night, Willow." "Good night," she replied, lingering for just a moment before returning inside, feeling as though something important had shifted between them, though neither had said exactly what they meant. As March arrived, bringing the first hints of spring to the valley, activity on the ranch increased. Calving season had begun, keeping Remington and his men busy day and night. Willow found herself caring for orphaned calves brought to the barn, bottle feeding them alongside baby Thomas, who at 4 months old was growing stronger every day. Emma and James, now 7 and 5, had fully embraced ranch life. Emma had graduated from the pony to a gentle mare under Remington's careful instruction, while James had discovered a knack for working with the dogs that helped herd the cattle. Even little Sarah, not yet 3, had found her place, helping Willow gather eggs from the chicken coop each morning. One afternoon, as Willow hung laundry on the line behind the house, she spotted Remington returning early from the north pasture. There was a stiffness to his posture that concerned her, and as he dismounted in front of the barn, she saw him wince, his hand going to his side. Setting down her basket, Willow hurried toward him. "What happened?" Remington straightened, clearly trying to hide his discomfort. "Nothing serious." Young Bull got a bit too spirited. "You're hurt," she insisted, noting how he held his arm against his ribs. "Come inside and let me look at it." "It's just a bruise," he protested, but allowed her to lead him toward the house. In the kitchen, Willow made him sit while she put water on to boil. "Take off your shirt," she instructed, gathering clean cloths and a jar of salve she'd made from comfrey and arnica. Remington hesitated, then complied, unbuttoning his shirt with obvious difficulty. As he pulled it away, Willow couldn't suppress a gasp. His entire right side was already darkening with bruises, and a long scrape ran across his ribs. "Just a bruise," she scolded, dipping a cloth in the warm water. "You could have broken ribs. What happened, really?" "Got caught between a bull and a fence post," he admitted as she began to clean the scrape. "My own fault. Wasn't paying attention." Willow worked in silence for a moment, acutely aware of his bare skin beneath her fingers. Remington was lean but powerfully built, his body honed by years of physical labor. Old scars marked his chest and arms, telling the story of a life spent in dangerous work. "You need to be more careful," she murmured, applying the salve to his bruised side. "There are people who depend on you now." His eyes met hers, dark and intense. "Is that so?" The air between them suddenly felt charged with unspoken words. Willow's hand stilled on his ribs, her pulse quickening as she realized how close they were standing. "The ranch depends on you," she said carefully. "Your men, the livestock." "And you?" Remington asked quietly. "Do you depend on me, Willow?" Before she could answer, the door burst open and Emma ran in, chattering excitedly about something Hank had shown her in the stables. She stopped short at the sight of them, her eyes wide as she took in Remington's state of undress and the intimate tableau they presented. "Mr. Rem is hurt," Willow explained quickly, stepping back and busying herself with recapping the salve jar. "I was just helping clean him up." "Are you going to die?" Emma asked with a child's bluntness, approaching to examine the bruises with scientific curiosity. Remington's laugh broke the tension in the room. "Not today, Miss Emma, though your mother might finish what that bull started if I don't follow her instructions." The moment had passed, but something had changed. In the days that followed, Willow found herself hyper-aware of Remington's presence, the sound of his voice, the way he moved through a room, the brush of his hand against hers when passing the coffee at breakfast. And more than once, she caught him watching her with that same intensity she'd glimpsed in the kitchen. As March gave way to April, the ranch burst into activity. Fields needed plowing and planting, cattle had to be moved to fresh pastures, and preparations began for the spring roundup. Through it all, Willow's feelings for Remington continued to deepen, though neither of them spoke of what was growing between them, until the night of the spring storm. It came upon them suddenly, a violent thunderstorm that rolled across the valley with little warning. Lightning cracked across the sky, followed by deafening thunder that sent the children scrambling into Willow's bed in terror. "It's all right," she soothed, gathering them close as rain lashed against the windows. "Just a storm. We're safe inside." A particularly loud thunderclap shook the house, and little Sarah buried her face against Willow's nightgown, sobbing. Emma, trying to be brave, flinched at each flash of lightning while James had pulled the quilt over his head entirely. Only baby Thomas slept on, undisturbed in his cradle. The bedroom door opened and Remington stood there, concern evident in his face. "Everyone all right up here?" he asked, taking in the huddle of frightened children. "We're managing," Willow said, attempting a reassuring smile despite the storm's ferocity. "Though I'm not sure any of us will get much sleep tonight." Remington hesitated, then entered the room fully. "My mother used to tell stories during storms," he offered, "said they helped drown out the thunder." "A story?" Emma emerged from the blankets, her fear momentarily forgotten. "Will you tell us one, Mr. Rem?" Remington looked to Willow for permission, and at her nod he settled into the chair beside the bed. "Well now, let me think. Have I ever told you about the time I helped drive 2,000 cattle from Texas all the way to Kansas?" The children shook their heads, eyes wide with interest. "It was the summer of '66, he began, his deep voice steady against the storm's rage. "I was young, not much more than a boy, really." As Remington spun his tale of cattle drives and cowboys, bandits and river crossings, the children gradually relaxed. Even Sarah's tears subsided as she became engrossed in the adventure. Willow watched them, her heart swelling with affection for this man who had brought not just safety to her family, but joy as well. When the story ended, the storm had begun to abate, thunder now rumbling in the distance rather than directly overhead. "Another one, please," James begged, no longer hiding beneath the quilt. "I think one's enough for tonight," Willow said gently. The storm's moving away now, time to try for sleep. Amid protests and negotiations, Remington rose to leave. Emma, suddenly bold, reached out to catch his hand. "Thank you for the story, Mr. Rem. You tell them almost as good as Papa did." A shadow crossed Remington's face, but he smiled at the little girl. "That's high praise, Miss Emma. Your papa must have been a fine storyteller." "He was," Emma said solemnly, "but I like your stories too." After settling the children back in their own beds, Willow found Remington waiting in the hallway, his expression troubled in the dim light of the oil lamp. "Everything all right?" she asked quietly, pulling her robe tighter around her nightgown. "I don't want to replace their father," he said abruptly. "I would never presume." Willow studied him for a long moment. "Is that what's been holding you back? Fear of stepping into Thomas's place?" Remington looked startled, then sheepish. "That obvious, am I, to me?" she admitted. "Perhaps because I've been wrestling with similar thoughts." She took a deep breath. "Thomas was a good man, a good father, but he's gone, Remington, and my children need someone in their lives who cares for them the way you do." "And what about their mother?" he asked softly. "What does she need?" Willow felt heat rise to her cheeks, but held his gaze steadily. "She needs someone who sees her as more than just a widow with 4 children, someone who values her for herself." Remington stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I've never been good with words, Willow. But from the moment I saw you in that store with your baby against your heart and steel in your spine, I knew you were someone special." His hand rose hesitantly to touch her cheek. "I didn't bring you here out of pity. I brought you here because something in me recognized something in you, and every day since, I've been falling deeper." Willow leaned into his touch, her heart racing. "I never expected to feel this way again," she whispered. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. And now—" Remington's voice was rough with emotion. In answer, Willow rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened as months of unspoken longing finally found expression. His arms came around her, strong and secure, and for the first time since receiving that terrible telegram, Willow felt truly whole. When they finally parted, both breathless, Remington rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly," he said, "if you'll allow it." Willow laughed softly. "We've been living under the same roof for months. I think we're well past the formal courtship stage." "Nevertheless," he insisted, "you deserve to be wooed, Willow Lane, and I intend to do just that." True to his word, Remington began a proper courtship, despite the unconventional circumstances. He brought her wildflowers gathered from the pastures, carved wooden toys for the children, and arranged for Hank's wife to come stay with the little ones so he could take Willow on a proper picnic by the creek that ran through the property. Spring blossomed into early summer, and with it, Willow and Remington's relationship deepened. The children, who had already grown attached to him, began to see him as a permanent fixture in their lives. Even baby Thomas, now 6 months old and sitting up on his own, would light up with smiles when Remington entered a room. One evening in June, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while the children played in the yard, Remington took Willow's hand in his. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "A dangerous pastime," she teased gently, squeezing his fingers. He smiled, then grew serious again. "When I first saw you in that store, you had nothing but those 4 babies and the clothes on your back. I wanted to help, to give you shelter. But these past months, you've given me so much more than I ever gave you." Willow started to protest, but he shook his head. "Let me finish. This house was never a home until you and the children came. I never knew how empty it was until it was filled with laughter and stories and, yes, even crying in the middle of the night." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I'm not asking out of obligation or pity. I'm asking because I love you, Willow Lane. I love your strength and your kindness, your stubbornness and your smile. I love the mother you are to your children, and I would be honored if you'd allow me to be a father to them." Opening the box, he revealed a simple but beautiful gold ring set with a small diamond. "Will you marry me?" Tears filled Willow's eyes as she looked from the ring to the man holding it, this strong, quiet cowboy who had saved them in more ways than one. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Remington Irons, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, a cheer went up from the yard. They turned to find all four children watching them, Emma and James jumping up and down in excitement, Sarah clapping her hands in imitation, and baby Thomas bouncing in Emma's careful grip. "Were you all eavesdropping?" Willow asked, laughing through her tears. "Mr. Rem told us he was going to ask you," Emma admitted, running up to the porch. "He said we should give you privacy, but we couldn't help it." Remington gathered the little girl up in one arm. "And what do you think about having me as a step-papa, Miss Emma?" Emma wrapped her arms around his neck. "I think it's the best idea ever. James and Sarah do too. We voted." "Did you now?" Willow asked, amused and touched by their enthusiasm. James nodded solemnly. 3-1. Tommy didn't really understand the question, so his vote doesn't count. Remington laughed, the sound rich and free in a way Willow had rarely heard before. "Well, I'm glad to have the majority approval." That night, after the children were asleep, Willow and Remington sat by the fire, planning their future together. They decided on a simple ceremony at the end of summer, after the busiest ranch work was done. Just family and a few close friends, with Hank standing up as Remington's best man and Mrs. Jenkins coming from Stockton to support Willow. "The children should have your name," Willow said, leaning against his shoulder, "if you're willing." Remington's arm tightened around her. "Nothing would make me prouder than to call them mine," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "All four of them. When I first met you, you said I take them," Willow recalled softly. "Do you remember that?" "I remember everything about that day," he replied. "You standing there in that thin coat with your baby against your heart, too proud to beg but desperate enough to ask for help." "I thought you were just being kind," she admitted. "I never imagined we would end up here." "I think part of me knew," Remington said thoughtfully. "Not consciously, perhaps, but something in my soul recognized yours from the first moment." The summer months passed in a golden haze of happiness. The ranch prospered, the cattle grew fat on the rich grass, and the children flourished under the combined care of Willow and Remington. Baby Thomas took his first tentative steps, toddling from his mother's arms to Remington's outstretched hands while the whole family cheered. August arrived, bringing with it their wedding day. The ceremony took place beneath the sprawling oak tree near the creek, with a small group of friends and neighbors in attendance. Emma, James, and Sarah stood with their mother, dressed in their finest clothes, while baby Thomas, now 9 months old, was held by Hank's wife in the front row. Willow wore a simple dress of pale blue silk, a gift from Remington, who had ordered it specially from San Francisco. Her hair was dressed with wildflowers gathered by Emma that morning, and she carried a bouquet of the same blooms. When the time came to speak their vows, Remington took both her hands in his eyes never leaving hers as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her for all his days. Willow, her voice steady despite the emotion welling in her chest, made the same promises in return. "By the power vested in me," the preacher concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Irons." As Remington gathered her into his arms for their first kiss as a married couple, cheers erupted from their small audience. The loudest came from Emma and James, while Sarah contributed by throwing her flower petals into the air rather than at the couple as instructed. The celebration that followed was joyous, a feast laid out on long tables under the trees, music provided by some of the ranch hands who played fiddle and guitar, and dancing that continued until the sun began to set. As twilight deepened, Hank approached the newly married couple. "Everything's set at the house," he said with a meaningful look at Remington. "And Mrs. Jenkins has agreed to stay with the children tonight." Willow looked between the two men in confusion. "What's this about?" Remington smiled, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "Just a small surprise for my bride." "If you'll excuse us, folks." Taking her hand, he led Willow away from the celebration and toward the creek. There, hidden among the trees, was a small cabin she'd never noticed before, with light glowing warmly from its windows. "What is this place?" she asked as they approached. "My first home on this land," Remington explained. "Before I built the main house, I've been fixing it up these past months. Thought we might like somewhere private for our wedding night and perhaps as a special retreat now and then." Inside, the cabin was simple but beautiful. A fire burned in the stone hearth, casting golden light over the polished wood floors. Fresh flowers stood in a vase on the table, and the bed was made up with crisp white linens. "It's perfect," Willow breathed, touched by the thought and care he'd put into this surprise. Remington came to stand behind her, his hands gently resting on her shoulders. "I want to give you everything, Willow. Everything I have, everything I am." She turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. "You already have. You gave us a home when we had none. You gave my children a father when they'd lost theirs." Her voice softened. "And you gave me back my heart when I thought it was broken beyond repair." His kiss was tender at first, then increasingly passionate as the reality of their new relationship settled over them. They had been living in the same house for months, caring for the children together, building a partnership based on respect and deepening affection. But this was different, the beginning of a true marriage in every sense of the word. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of the cabin, Willow's head resting on Remington's chest, he ran his fingers through her loose hair and spoke of the future. "I was thinking we might expand the house come spring," he said thoughtfully. "Add a few more bedrooms. The boys will need their own space as they get older." Willow smiled against his skin. "Planning ahead, are we?" "I've always been a man who likes to be prepared," he replied, his hand moving to the small of her back. "And who knows? We might need the extra room for more than just the boys we have now." She raised her head to look at him in the dim light. "Are you saying you want more children?" Remington's eyes were soft as they met hers. "I never thought I'd have a family at all. Now that I do, I find I'm greedy for more of this happiness." He hesitated. "But only if you want that too. 4 is already a handful." "4 is a blessing," Willow corrected gently. "And yes, I think I would like to give them a brother or sister someday, one that has your eyes, perhaps." His smile was radiant as he pulled her closer. "Mrs. Irons, you have made me the happiest man in California." The next morning, they returned to the main house to find the children eagerly awaiting them, full of stories about their evening with Mrs. Jenkins and questions about being a proper family now. "Does this mean we call you Papa?" James asked Remington directly, his small face serious. Remington crouched down to the boy's level. "Only if you want to, son. I won't ever try to replace the father you lost. But I promise to love you and your sisters and brother as if you were born of my own blood." James considered this solemnly. "I think Papa Thomas would be glad you're taking care of us now," he finally decided. "So I'll call you Papa Rem. Is that all right?" "That's perfect," Remington replied, his voice rough with emotion as he gathered the boy into a hug. Summer faded into autumn, bringing with it the harvest and preparations for winter. The Iron R Ranch, always productive, seemed to flourish under the combined stewardship of Remington and Willow. The house, once merely functional, became truly a home filled with the scent of baking, the sound of children's laughter, and the warmth of a family growing together. By Christmas, Willow had news to share with her husband. She waited until the children were asleep, their stockings hung by the fireplace in anticipation of morning, before joining Remington on the porch where he stood watching the snow fall gently across the valley. "Cold night to be outside," she chided gently, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders. "Just thinking about how different things were a year ago," he replied, drawing her close against him. "Last Christmas, this house was empty. I was alone with no idea how my life was about to change." "For the better, I hope," Willow teased, though she knew the answer. "Beyond anything I could have imagined." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "What about you? Is this Christmas better than the last?" Willow thought back to the previous year, the grief still raw, the fear for her children's future, the desperate struggle to keep a roof over their heads. "Incomparably better," she said softly. "And next Christmas will be even more special." Remington looked down at her, curiosity in his eyes. "Why is that?" She took his hand and placed it over her still flat stomach. "Because our family will be even larger by then." For a moment he stared at her in disbelief. Then joy broke across his face like sunrise. "A baby, you're certain?" Willow nodded, her own happiness reflected in his expression. "Dr. Simmons confirmed it yesterday when he came to check on Sarah's cough. It should arrive around June." Remington swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his excitement. "5 children," he marveled, setting her down gently. "If anyone had told me a year ago that I'd be a father to 5, I'd have called them crazy. And now I can't imagine my life any other way," he said simply. Spring came early to the valley that year, as if nature itself was eager to welcome the new life growing within Willow. The ranch expanded its operations, adding sheep to the cattle after Remington determined the higher pastures would support both. The extra income allowed them to hire additional hands, including a young woman from town who helped Willow with the housework as her pregnancy progressed. Emma, now 8, took her role as eldest sister very seriously, especially with the prospect of a new baby. She followed Willow around, asking endless questions about the baby and offering to help with everything from naming to diaper changing. "Were you this interested when your mother was expecting Sarah or Thomas?" Remington asked her one evening as they sat on the porch, Emma having just presented a list of possible names for the new baby. Emma considered the question. "I don't really remember with Sarah. I was too little, and with Tommy." She frowned slightly. "Mama was sad a lot then, because Papa was away at the mines. So nobody talked about the baby much." Remington exchanged a glance with Willow, understanding passing between them. Thomas Lane's death had overshadowed his youngest son's birth, casting a shadow that was only now fully lifting from the family. "Well, this baby is something we can all be happy about together," he said, wrapping an arm around Emma's small shoulders. "And your help is going to be very important." In early June, just as the wildflowers reached their peak in the valley meadows, Willow went into labor. The midwife was summoned from town, and Hank's wife came to stay with the children while Remington remained steadfastly by Willow's side throughout her labor. "You don't have to stay," she told him during a brief respite between contractions. "Most men wait outside." "I'm not most men," he replied, wiping her brow with a cool cloth. "And I'm not leaving you alone for a moment." The labor was long but uncomplicated, and as dawn broke over the mountains, Their daughter was born a robust baby girl with a tuft of dark hair and eyes that would later reveal themselves to be the same deep green as her father's. "She's perfect," Remington whispered, cradling the newborn with tears in his eyes. "Just like her mother." They named her Rebecca Hope Irons Rebecca after Remington's mother, and hope for what she represented to their blended family. When the older children were finally allowed in to see their new sister, their reactions were everything Willow and Remington could have hoped for. Emma immediately appointed herself assistant caretaker, while James declared the baby small but acceptable. Sarah, now 3, was fascinated by Rebecca's tiny fingers and toes, and even Thomas, at nearly a year and a half, seemed to understand the importance of being gentle with the new arrival. "Look at us," Remington murmured to Willow later that day as they watched their 5 children together, the 4 she had brought to him, and the one they had created together. "Who would have thought a winter storm could lead to this?" Willow leaned against him, tired but deeply content. "I like to think we would have found each other somehow, storm or no storm." "I believe you're right," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Some things are just meant to be." Over the years that followed, the Iron R continued to prosper under Remington's careful management, while the Irons family grew in love and happiness. Emma developed into a skilled horsewoman who could outride most of the hands by the time she was 12. James discovered a talent for working with the land, often accompanying Remington as he made decisions about crops and grazing. Sarah, with her gentle nature, became the family peacemaker, while Thomas inherited his mother's quick mind and his stepfather's quiet strength. Rebecca, the first child born of their union, was joined by a brother 2 years later, William Thomas Irons, named for both his grandmothers and the father. Emma, James, Sarah, and Thomas had lost but never forgotten. On the 10th anniversary of the day Remington had first stepped in to help a desperate widow and her children, the entire family gathered for a special dinner at the ranch. The table was crowded now, 6 children ranging from Emma at 17 down to Lillian, their youngest at 3, plus Hank and his wife who had become like family over the years. As Willow looked around at the faces of her loved ones, she remembered that terrible day when she'd received news of Thomas's death. The despair she had felt then seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by a life richer and fuller than she could ever have imagined. After dinner, when the younger children had been put to bed and Emma and James were helping clear the table, Remington took Willow's hand and led her outside to the porch where they had shared so many important moments. "Happy anniversary," he said softly, presenting her with a small wooden box. Inside, Willow found a locket containing a tiny portrait of all 6 children on one side, and on the other, a miniature painting of the ranch house as it had looked on that first snowy day when they arrived. "It's beautiful," she whispered, touching the delicate gold surface. 10 years, Remington mused, helping her fasten the locket around her neck. "Sometimes it feels like we've always been together, and other times it seems like just yesterday that I walked into that store and saw you standing there with baby Thomas. I was so afraid that day," Willow admitted. "Afraid for my children, afraid of the future. And now," she smiled up at him, her heart full, "now I know that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures. That storm brought me to you and you became our shelter." Remington drew her into his arms, his embrace as strong and sure as it had been the first time he held her. "No, Willow, you came to me when my life was empty, when I had everything a man could want except what mattered most." He kissed her gently. "You brought love into my home. You gave me a family. You made me whole." As they stood together under the vast starlit sky, surrounded by the ranch they had built into a haven for their family, Willow thought about the long journey that had brought them to this moment, from grief to joy, from desperation to abundance, from strangers to beloved partners. "I love you, Remington Irons," she said simply. "Thank you for taking us in that day." "I love you, Willow Irons," he replied, his voice rich with emotion. "Thank you for staying." And as he lowered his lips to hers in a kiss that held all the tenderness and passion of their years together, Willow knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was always meant to be, not just sheltered from life's storms, but flourishing in the sunshine that had followed.